Hello and welcome to Little Learners. Recently on Instagram I asked what kind of videos you want to see in 2020 and a lot of you said that you wanted to know about my experience during my PGCE. So this is that story. Before we get started, don't forget to click that subscribe button so you never miss a future video, and if you do find this video helpful, entertaining, interesting at any point, do give it a thumbs up as it really helps out the channel. So for those of you watching who don't know, a PGCE stands for Postgraduate Certificate in Education, and it is a qualification that allows you to teach. It's not the only route into teaching, and if you want a video on different routes into teaching, let me know in the comments below because that is something I could make. So I did my PGCE at St Mary's University in Twickenham. It is a fantastic university, I would highly recommend it. They're not sponsoring me or anything, I'm just being a good alumna. But honestly, I love the university. I did my undergraduate degree, my PGCE, and I just finished my master's there as well. So I did all of those there, and I wouldn't have gone back if I didn't love it. St Mary's is really well known and well respected in the teaching community. They are Ofsted rated outstanding, and so when I was in schools, as soon as I would say I was at St Mary's, teachers would automatically know that that was a really good university and that they produced really great teachers. I had really supportive lecturers while I was there as well, and as you'll find out in this video, that was really necessary because this was not an easy journey. Now, I just want to say here that this is my PGCE experience and not everyone's is going to be the same for various reasons, and there are some ups and there are some downs, but don't get put off by the downs, carry on watching until the end because I promise there is a happy ending. So my journey into teaching actually started not at the primary level. So I had always thought that I wanted to be a secondary English teacher. That had been my plan for a very, very long time, and so I actually applied for and got onto a course, a PGCE course for secondary primary. Definitely meant to say secondary English there, so sorry about that. Let's move on and pretend it never happened. And it was at that point that I got accepted that I realised that wasn't what I wanted to do anymore. For a couple of years leading up to this point, I had been working with a couple of different tuition companies and mostly been teaching primary school children and primary school level, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And so when I got the email to say that I had been accepted onto this secondary English course, I had a bit of a crisis and I didn't know what to do because I had been following this one path, this kind of expectation of what I was going to do for a very long time, and now that wasn't the path that I wanted to follow anymore, and it was a big decision, but I decided that primary was definitely what I wanted to do, and so I rejected the offer from the university I was going to go to for the secondary English course so that I could apply for a primary PGCE course. Now, I was applying quite late and I was just really, really lucky that the university I wanted to go to, St Mary's, had some spaces left and they were doing one more round of interviews. I think there were about 5 of us who went for the interview. The interview was made up of a few different parts. There was a written test where I was given, I think, an article, and then I was asked to use my knowledge of education in the news recently to write about this article. So I had to go in with knowledge of what was current in the news of education. So if you are thinking of doing a PGCE or some kind of teaching qualification and you're going for an interview, it's really good for a few weeks leading up to that to just be looking at education news every day. After the written part of the interview, I then had to go and have a face-to-face interview with a panel of people. They asked me lots of different questions, most of which I can't really remember anymore, but I remember one of the questions was, this is a very full-on course. What can you tell us that will convince us that you are prepared for that? So when I started my PGCE, there were a lot of us. I think there were about 5 groups of 30, so we were put into groups, and when we had our lectures it was all of us together, and then when we had our seminars it was just our 30 people in a group. So it was kind of like having a class, being back at school again. We had seminars and lectures in lots of different subjects, so subjects that we would be teaching at school, obviously English, maths and science were kind of the core, and then we had things like religious education, art, IT, languages, history, geography, PE. PE was twice a week, every week, and I hated it. But that's because I hated PE at school as well. However, I realised on this course that the subjects that I didn't like at school, like PE and maths, I had to make sure that I didn't project that onto my students and that I worked extra hard to get them to like those subjects, because I didn't want my future students to feel the same way I did about certain subjects at school. Important to note here that the PGCE was full-time. It was not like my undergrad where I had, I think, 8 or 10 contact hours a week. This was full-time every single day. You can't really have a job at the same time, although I did have a very, very, very part-time job during this. I was doing some creative writing tutoring at some schools, but you really have to be very dedicated because it's very full-on. We also had a module or two that were at master's level, so if you managed to pass those at master's level, you got master's credits, and that meant that when you finished your PGCE, you could go back with, I think, about a third of a master's and continue a master's in education if you wanted to. In terms of assessments while I was at university, they really ranged from essays and written assignments to presentations. There was group work, individual work, and of course then there were assessments in school, and that brings me to school practice. So I had 3 different times that I was in a school during my PGCE. So there was a stretch of time in the autumn term and then another stretch of time in the spring/summer term. Those 2 were kind of my big bulk school placements, and those were organised by the university, and then there was a shorter one in the middle that wasn't assessed, that I had to organise myself, so I had to contact the schools myself, and that was to give people the opportunity to go to certain schools that they might not be able to go to otherwise. So some people went to special educational needs schools, some people went to a school back where they lived because they were actually from somewhere much further away from Twickenham. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's talk about my first school placement. This was not the dream. This was the nightmare. I almost, and this is no exaggeration, quit. So when I started my first school placement, I had a couple of days in uni and then a few days in school, and that happened for 2 or 3 weeks. That was kind of just to support your transition going into school. So for about 3 weeks, whenever I would go into the school, no one would talk to me. It was so horrible. It was really lonely. I would sit in the staff room, no one would come and speak to me. My class tutor mentor, so the class teacher who I was working with, was not the friendliest and didn't really seem to like children very much. Now, I must say that this teacher was a very, very busy one. They were the head of Year 4 and also the head of maths. So I really wasn't sure how they were going to manage to also have a student in their class and keep up with all of my stuff as well. And they didn't really. They didn't read any of the material that they were supposed to read, so they never really knew what I was supposed to be doing, which meant that I had to chase a lot of things, which was fine. But when you're somewhere that isn't very supportive and all you want to do is learn, it's really difficult. It was also a very challenging school. So this school had a very, very high proportion of children from low income backgrounds. There was a very high percentage of students with behavioural difficulties, and the class that I was in was a Year 4 class, and the class was at a kind of Year 2 level. So there were a lot of challenges, and so it's no wonder that a lot of the teachers were very stressed. I was pretty miserable on this first school experience, I have to say. Thankfully, I had a really great link tutor who was someone who was from the university and would come and see me in school and would do a couple of assessments as well, and I could contact him during that time and he could give me any advice that I needed. And thankfully he was really, really lovely and really supportive. When I explained to him all of the issues that I was having, he actually came in and did a couple of extra visits to support the school because the school just didn't really seem to know how to have a student. And I have to say that the only thing that really got me through were the children and the times that I got to teach. I absolutely loved teaching. I loved having the class to myself. At first it was team teaching, so I would teach with the class teacher, and then eventually I'd get more responsibility and more independence and I would start teaching on my own. It was not easy. It was really, really challenging, and I certainly learnt what kind of teacher I did not want to be when I was there. However, that was very valuable experience, and even though at the time it was horrible, I can see the value that that had. I also got whooping cough while I was there, so that was horrible. In a nutshell, it got better towards the end, but it was a horrible school experience. And so if you're watching and you are currently having a bad school experience, or you end up having one where you're not feeling great about it, just know that you can get through it, you can do it, and I promise you it will get a lot better. So that brings me to my second school experience. So after the first one, I was so happy not to be there anymore, but I was quite nervous going into the second one. At least in the second one, I could kind of have a bit more freedom, and I wasn't being assessed on this one, so I could kind of float around different classrooms and get a feel for different areas of the school and different things that I hadn't been able to experience yet. I went into a reception class, a year 1 class, a year 5 class, and I had such a wonderful time. This school was so lovely and welcoming and supportive. They just wanted to help me learn. They would bend over backwards so that I could get the experiences that I wanted. It could not have been further from my first school, and it made such a difference. It really made me feel like, okay, I can do this. It's not always going to be awful, because there are places that I feel more at home. So I am so grateful to the staff at that second school for helping me get my confidence back in people as well as in teaching. So that was a short school experience, and then my third one was the big one. This was the one where I would be doing even more teaching, and obviously more was expected of me because I'd gone through a lot of my PGCE course by now. Again, this school, very similar to the second one I went to. They were really supportive. People said hello to me in the corridor even though they'd never seen me before. They asked me how things were going. They asked about my life. They were just really nice people. And my class tutor mentor, the class teacher I was working with, was amazing. She had had lots of students from St Mary's before. She knew how it all worked. She used her own experience as a student to help me. I taught a lot more. I felt a lot more confident. The class teacher had confidence in me, which was amazing because then that made me feel even more confident. And I was able to really push myself more and learn how to be a better teacher. This was the school that I finally got my job at. So while I was doing my teaching practice there, I had an interview for a teaching pool. So a teaching pool is usually for a borough or an area. You go and you have an interview, and if they like you, they accept you into the pool, and then they send out your information to lots of schools, and the schools contact you rather than you contacting the schools. It's quite competitive, so I was really, really proud that I got into it. So I was getting lots of offers from schools to come in for interviews or to come in to see the school, because once you get in through the pool, those schools know that you are a really good candidate. However, the assistant head at the school I was currently at kept trying to put me off a lot of these schools, and I didn't really notice it at first. She would just say, oh no, I know about that school, you don't want to go there, or she would just say things to try and put me off, and then eventually it turned out it was because she knew that they were about to interview and she wanted me to interview for the school. So that was a tactic, I guess. And so I did interview at my school and I got a job, and the rest, as they say, is history. So my final thoughts. Doing a PGCE is really, really hard. However, I don't think there are any routes into teaching that aren't going to be difficult and don't require a lot of hard work. There were a few people in my year who didn't make it to the end. You have to really be sure that this is something that you want to do, and you have to love it. If you don't love it, it won't work for you. I loved teaching and learning how to teach, and so even though it was stressful, I had some really low times during my PGCE, and even though it caused me to cry a lot, I mean, I do cry anyway, but it was very stressful, it was still the best decision that I could have made. I'm really glad that I decided to do primary education rather than secondary. It was definitely the right decision for me. I mentioned at the beginning of this video that everyone's experience of a PGCE is going to be slightly different, and that's because of their own personalities and backgrounds, but also because of the different schools that they were in. So I know some people on my course who loved every single placement that they were put on, they loved every single school they were in, and so they had a slightly different experience to me. But that doesn't mean that my experience was any less valuable. As I said, I learnt a lot about what kind of teacher I didn't want to be. But of course, I also really learnt what kind of a teacher I wanted to be. And I'm so grateful to the wonderful teachers that I got to work with, and also to my university for teaching me that. Again, if you are looking for a great university that is very close to London, St Mary's University in Twickenham, where I went, is in a London borough, and I would highly, highly recommend it. I am so grateful to all of the staff there who helped me on my PGCE journey. I ended up with an outstanding at the end of it, and I'm really proud of everything I did. So let me know in the comments below if you have any other questions or what your experiences of teacher training have been like. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.